Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Break the ISAK podcast. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the most recent presidential debate in reference to the upcoming election, and we have a special guest star with us today. Anna, would you like to introduce him?
Yes, sure. Our guest today is Mr. Earwood, who is a global politics teacher at UWC ISAK Japan. He is from the US and previously worked in the US, Germany, and Jordan, and now lives in Japan with his family. Mr. Earwood, would you like to greet our listeners?
Yeah, I'm glad to be here this morning, and thank you for having me on the show. And this is a big topic that we're discussing today, and something that has global implications about the leader of the U.S. So yeah, it's something that is of certain interest to me, and I hope I can be helpful this morning.
You sure will be. Now let's talk a bit about the history of the Commission on Presidential Debates, because it was not always the organization, the non-profit organization that organized these debates. So the first debates took place between Kennedy and Nixon. They were sponsored directly by the television networks that they were aired on. And then the League of Women Voters took over, which was a civic organization, and they were independent. And then at some point, the campaigns of the two parties negotiated new terms that favored the two-party system, quote-unquote, behind closed doors, and the interest of the candidates. So, would you like to add anything onto that, Mr. Earwood?
Yeah, I think the debates are something very interesting, and what you brought up with the Kennedy and Nixon was that this was the first time that the role of television had a huge part in debates, and as you see here, you made mention of how Nixon didn't use makeup, and that first debate he was sweating profusely and just looked out of character, out of sync, and then you have this young, fresh-faced John F. Kennedy, who's very attractive, very good looking, is on the mic and is on the screen, and just really was charismatic and had a huge amount of influence through the way he looked and the way he spoke. And I think that with these debates, it really changed democracy to the extent that now you not only have to be smart, intellectual, and have good policy, but you have to look good. You have to speak well, and you have to be able to conduct yourself almost in like a reality star type manner of like reality TV in modern day. So it really changed how democracies are run and functioned with the use of television. And as we talk about Donald Trump today, that really we can see that, and a lot of the trouble that he gets into is how unpresidential he is and how he speaks. And we can, that really is a huge issue with Donald Trump. It's the linguistics of how he uses, the rhetoric that he uses.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny that you mentioned sort of reality TV stars in Trump, because if you didn't know, Donald Trump did used to be a basically reality TV show host on The Apprentice. And, also talking about how Nixon refused to wear makeup, a lot of times these debates are a little more, staged out than you might expect. I mean, they argue about how far the podiums are going to be apart, how far the audience is going to be away, how much rise the podiums are going to be. So definitely there's a lot that goes into this. And it's very intense, and they actually argue for weeks about kind of the simplest things, like what color the background is going to be, things like that. So as Anna mentioned earlier, there are, there's been a long history of who's been running the presidential debates and how they've been organized. Most recently, the Commission for Presidential Debates is owned together by Democrats and Republicans, and to get on the debate stage, you have to be polling 15% nationally. So you have to have 15% of the national vote to be considered to go up on the main stage. Anna, do you have anything to add?
Yes, you also have to be on the ballot in the sufficient amount of states to have a mathematical chance of winning. But a lot of people say that even if these criteria were met, third parties would often be excluded still, and they would just raise the barriers of entry. The Commission of the Presidential Debates is owned by the Democrats and Republicans, but they are sponsored privately. This year, only 6 private corporations were the ones who facilitated the event. So even though it's a non-profit, it has some link to special interest groups, and it is not very nice to hear that basically corporations have the agenda setting power, which might link to the course of global politics that we do in IB.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped ahead, you guys. I jumped ahead
No
to the
worries.
next talking point, so I apologize about that. I didn't even deal with the...
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I just, I don't know much behind what goes into establishing the debates, and it looks like you guys have done your homework on that. But I do think, we talk about the corporations, talk about who's buying who and setting the agenda, and it's definitely an issue that we are facing right now, and it's one that is becoming even more powerful, the corporations are. And, it's something that I think a lot of American people are waking up to and are losing a little bit of faith in our democratic process, on both sides. It's just how much influence is taken by the private sector. And yeah, it's really interesting. It's very interesting. And you're talking about how far everything has to be apart, and that type of stuff. I mean, we saw that Donald Trump was very upset because they were going to mute the mics after 2 minutes. He was really wanted to be able to talk over his opponent, and so they're very particular because they know that how you are on screen is very important. It's theatrics. It's like a reality TV set in a way.
Yeah, so now we're going to move into the actual debate. What we've done is broken it up into different sections where we have Biden's policy or answer and then what Trump said. First up is the environment, which is interesting because we were just talking about corporate backers, and I don't think it's a secret that oftentimes companies will lobby against regulations and environmental ones. So Biden says that, he's going to put new regulations on the fossil fuel industry. He is going to spend a lot of federal money to put charging stations on the road for electric cars. And Trump says that basically he's going to let it be the way it is now and not put any more pressure or regulations on the fossil fuel industry.
He also says that he wants the best, cleanest water and air for the American people, and that the US has the best, lowest numbers when it comes to pollution. And another thing that is basically the government's job is to regulate pollution. And Donald Trump during his presidency got rid of some of the regulations regarding that, and there were some really heated moments in the debate when they talked about families that are affected by the pollution in Texas, for example. And I live near a fossil fuel fountain, or and yes, it affects the quality of the air, and it might cause some health risks for those families involved. So it is an issue not only in regards to environment, but of healthcare and human rights, essentially.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think that this is, as we see, especially, going in with, the climate change and now being an American, and I also know that there's a lot of people who are skeptical of climate change, of it being real or it being used as a political tool to push a particular agenda. But yeah, looking at both candidates and, with Biden, to eliminate the fossil fuel industry. And I think most Americans realize that's unrealistic. That's not going to happen. And it's, but also the best, cleanest water and air, which is Trump's position. And I think American people know that that's not going to happen as well. But I think it's kind of the idea of how your worldview and what you think, and that's what kind of people are voting towards. Like they're both extreme cases, and we know that they both aren't going to happen in the next 4 years. But it's kind of that idea of what do I believe that we should not be on fossil fuel, or do I believe that yes, fossil fuel is important, but we should also strive for clean air and water, and that's kind of the dilemma. It's about these debates, they all make these promises and none of them come true.
Happen, yeah.
Very, very little comes true. But it's the whole point is like, who do I identify with? Because that's what you're trying to do, is who do I see myself in? And
a specific example they brought up was, as Anna mentioned, in Texas, where there are families working next to factories and it's very, very polluted there. And Biden says, they have more health issues than the average people. And obviously this is a very bad thing. Whereas Trump's position on this is basically, they're also getting paid more than the average person, and you really want to take away those jobs from them. And again, so it's kind of the two perspectives on this. And like Mr. Earwood said, it's unlikely that anything dramatic would happen if either candidate were to be elected. But, it's still something that they kind of fundamentally disagree on, like you're saying, different points of view.
And another role of the debate in general is to really make sure that the average voter knows what the election is for, what the parties say. And the Commission on the Presidential Debates takes pride in bringing the debates into foreign lands and strengthening the democracy that way. So it is actually a good thing that they talk about important issues. And I think we can all agree that this final presidential debate was the most civilized one by far.
Definitely.
Yes. So maybe Caleb, do you want to add on that?
Certainly. So if you saw the first one, it was a lot of yelling and screaming and basically kind of ad hominem attacks. So it became a lot less about the actual issues and a lot more just attacking the other person. Whereas this issue, or in this debate in all total, actually was a lot more civilized and it was a lot more informational. For example, they weren't obsessing over, who's got bank accounts and where, who received foreign aid from which country. But they instead kind of talked about the actual issues and definitely was very informative. I mean, I watched it and I certainly felt that I knew more about both of these candidates than I did before.
Yeah, certainly. The rhetoric was certainly toned down, and it was more civil.
So now we'll move into healthcare. So just some context. Biden says that he wants to improve upon Obamacare and basically institute Biden care, whereas Trump says he wants to completely get rid of all that. He got rid of the individual mandate, and he is now doing his best to kind of get rid of Obamacare legislation.
Yes, and he also mentioned that he's gonna have a brand new healthcare plan, which he didn't really elaborate on, but we can be sure that the conservative Republican side would leave much more to the private sector in the healthcare of the nation, while Biden would have like more of a socialized medicine.
Right, and I think this is a. If I had to give a point, I'd probably say a point to Biden, only because Trump has had 4 years to unveil this healthcare plan that he's been talking about, and he hasn't unveiled anything. And Biden even makes mention of that in the debate. It's like, where is the plan? Where's the plan? You've had 4 years. And just like he also talks about the infrastructure, you talked about that. I still remember the State of the Union, Trump's first State of the Union address, which is where he addresses the government right when he came into office, and was talking about a failing infrastructure, meaning our roads, our trains, train line, all that. And we haven't seen that. We haven't seen both those things. And it's something that, I think, right now, Biden doesn't have to do much because with that argument, it's the burden of proof is on Trump.
Yeah.
So he has to show, what have you done? And the stock market may have been good and the economy may have been good, but in terms of the infrastructure and the healthcare, he's done nothing. So that's certainly something that probably leans in Biden's favor.
Definitely. And even now, since the election is so close, Trump really can't afford to do anything drastic because he has already, predicted to lose. So if he comes out and says, actually gives out a plan, one way or another, I think he would lose voters. If he goes into the private sector, I think he would lose voters who want, a more government-run healthcare system. And if he leans towards a more public health system, I think a lot of conservative Republicans are going to be mad and might not vote for him. So I think he is in a tough position here. And I think it's maybe one of the reasons why he hasn't announced it yet. I mean, he also might just not know or have an idea. But I think he is trying to kind of run down the middle of the road on some of these issues. Because he knows that he can't afford to lose any more voters, especially now.
But the big thing that he emphasized a lot, the only thing that essentially he has done in the area of healthcare is that he got rid of the individual mandate. Could any of you elaborate on the significance of that move?
Yeah, the individual mandate is really important because what that necessarily is talking about is if you have pre-existing conditions. So, and if I have cancer, if I have some type of disease that is where it's almost guaranteed that I'm going to need health care, the coverage may not cover me because I have pre-existing conditions. So that's the big one, and that's the one that Biden is saying that, really pushing that we need to cover all people regardless of what's wrong with, what type of condition they're in, so.
This kind of pre-existing conditions topic is quite relevant now with the COVID-19 outbreak, which is our next topic. Trump calls this the plague that came from China, but it has certainly caused a lot of problems globally. And he emphasized that it is a global issue and it causes problems worldwide, and it's not only the US that suffers. Biden would introduce national standards for the whole country, and this would probably include tough regulations and probably a lot of going back into the lockdown. However, on the other side, Trump is very against lockdowns at this point. He wants to open the country, and he has said that he can't afford another lockdown.
Yeah. So Trump's position is basically leave it to the states. Or if you were unaware, the states have a lot of power in the U.S. Government system, and they've been pretty much allowed to set their own agenda and rules for the COVID-19 crisis. For example, some states like Florida have done nearly nothing, honestly. They basically said, stay inside, we'd like you to wear a mask, but we're not going to make you do anything, whereas other states like New York, and I think that California is another example of this, went very hard into lockdowns and said, put on your masks wherever you go, don't go to work, don't go to restaurants, anything like that. And definitely it's led to a big swaths of the country where they're doing much better than other parts. For example, I went down to South Carolina and then went back up to Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania's rules are now is that if you went to South Carolina or a list of about 15 other states, you have to self-quarantine for 2 weeks when you come back in, because those states are doing significantly worse, partially because of their reaction or lack thereof to COVID-19. Do either of you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think, this is definitely, the COVID has shown us a lot about democracy, and especially our form of democracy in the U.S. It's called federalism, where there is a separation of power between individual states as well as the national government. And there's a lot of strength to federalism. The opposite is unitary system, which is what they have in the UK and France. So the idea is that, with federalism, each region has its own power, but yet there's national laws as well that they all have to adhere to. And Trump's really pushing the federalist idea that each individual state can create its own mandates and so on for the COVID crisis. But we've seen that to be very problematic. We've seen that to be very, lots of issues going on there. And this is a really tough one because, people are dying and that it is a very dangerous disease. But at the same time, I think, from the Trump standpoint, he said this over and over again, and it's becoming quite annoying, but the cure can't be worse than the symptom. So, with locking everything down, there's going to be serious repercussions to our economic system as well as the global system. And we saw in 2008, when the financial crisis, when the U.S. printed money, and how that inflated the international reserve of dollars, and how that created inflation in other countries. And we talked about a reading in our class about how that has really affected the Arab countries in particularly. And there's theories that says that the inflation of U.S. dollars in the Arab world created inflation, and the prices rose, and that really helped fuel the Arab Spring in 2011. So the idea is that, I'm torn on this, to be honest, and I have to be very careful not to share my opinion because this is a deadly disease. But at the same time, closing everything down, I don't know if that's the best option, because we are going to have serious, serious repercussions to this in the future. In hindsight, in English we say hindsight's 20/20. It's easy to look back and say what we should or shouldn't have done. Right now, it's not necessarily sure what we should do. So, it's a tough one, and I see both sides of the argument, but Biden's 100% correct. We need to have some type of national mandate, some type of unity. We are the American people, as you and I, Caleb, and we all need to be on the same page. We need to be on the same page, and the fact that we have 50 individual islands all making their own decisions, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
We were actually kind of talking about this in Glowpoke the other day, where it's the idea that sometimes you're all in a boat together, and when you're pushing water out of your own, you're shoving water into others, and everyone does kind of rely on one another, especially because there is very few border control between the states, so oftentimes people from states who are doing much worse go into states who are locked down and bring it there, which prevents them from fully recovering and the lockdown from being effective.
And that's what's ridiculous about all this, is that we aren't the European Union, we're not a confederacy. we shouldn't have to have border controls on states. Like we all should be on the same page, and we should be able. Like we're not individual. The states aren't individual countries, and that's something that this is a failure, in my opinion, of the Trump administration. In regards to having some type of national mandate. I don't necessarily believe that 100% a lockdown's the answer, though. Because of the economic consequences. How we can't just print money out of nowhere. We can, but it has horrible effects to the global economy because the world is on the U.S. dollar. That's the backup reserve. So, I don't know. I think both arguments are flawed on both candidates. And, we'll see. We'll see.
On that note, as to the economic consequences, I think another aspect of it that is worrying is the signs we have seen in the stock market. And also the huge amount of debts the governments are getting into to ease the consequences of the pandemic. And we can especially see this in the EU, where the EU grants huge funds to each country to ease the consequences of the pandemic, which are the consequences of the lockdown, essentially, because that is what causes the most economic problems. And it was very worrying. We've talked about this with Caleb, and at one point people started buying gold because they didn't trust companies anymore. And these are very worrying red flags in our opinion.
And there's going to absolutely be repercussions to this. And you also got to remember that democracies are short-sighted. And it's, I think, a flaw of democracy, which, it's the best we have as a global community. But democracies, politicians focus on the now, because they need to be reelected. What did you do for me today? So, of course, let's print more money. Of course, let's do these things. But what's going to be the consequence of this 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? I'm not an economist, but this is definitely, I'm also, aware of this. We're going to have consequences of this. So we'll see. I don't know. I'm glad I'm not a politician, because these are hard decisions to have to make right now. Very hard decisions. And I don't envy any of them. So, I think we need to be a bit more gracious towards them, to be honest. But it's a hard one.
Yeah. Speaking of hard issues, the next segment we're going to do is crime. So Biden says that he wants to reform, crime in the U.S. And a fun side note about that is he actually picked a district attorney as his vice president. So someone who is definitely very ingrained into the legal and justice system. Trump wants to be very hard on crime, basically. He thinks that, he wants to keep a lot of things criminalized, like marijuana, for example. I think Biden is leaning towards legalizing it. Trump wants to keep it legal. And they definitely have there are two very different outlooks on how crime should be treated in the U.S. What do either of you think about that?
Yeah, I think this is, with what's happening with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd in the U.S., this is a hot topic, and it should be. It should be on the national agenda. This is a difficult one. I think Biden was talking about national standards and how there needs to be reform, which is very important. And Trump definitely takes more of what we call a deterrent view of justice, punitive justice, where let's make the consequences so bad that it will deter people from committing crime. But the problem is that it's disproportionate. When you look at the crime, it's more people of darker skin who are getting arrested, and that's definitely the issue here. That's the real issue. This is another difficult talking point as well.
As for reforms and actions during the run of each candidate, even though Biden has chosen Kamala Harris as his vice president nominee, she was a district attorney, but at the same time she was hard on drugs, and Biden is now very much for not criminalizing a single drug abuse, and there is definitely some inconsistency in that campaign regarding that issue. And Trump called out Biden of being all talk and no action, while he is very proud that he has done some reforms regarding the criminal justice. And he often points out that he was helping the black community a lot because of that, because the law that Joe Biden passed during his political career, which was very a long one, actually put more young black people in jail, while Trump with Kim Kardashian and the other activists really kind of eased the criminal justice system and brought some reforms.
Donald Trump.
Yeah, for example, like mandatory minimums, I think he's done something to limit that. And if you were unaware, mandatory minimums is a rule in the U.S. where basically it's almost like 3 strikes. So you do 1 crime, 2 crimes, and 3 crimes, your sentence is significantly and very much so increased, regardless of what the other 3 crimes were. Specifically, this was a big issue and got a lot of heat because it included non-violent crimes as well. And something that's very interesting about this, and I'd be curious to know what you think, Mr. Earwood, is that Biden now is saying that we need a lot of reform, but in the past he actually has been very hard on crime. For example, the 1994 crime bill, which a lot of people blame for a lot of the injustices in this justice system we see today, and he certainly seems to have come around to the other side of that now.
Yeah, of course he is. It's an election.
Yeah.
I think the 3 strike bill came out of President Clinton's administration in the 90s, and that was a Democratic administration, and so it's not that we can look at and say, oh, the Republicans are all bad here and the Democrats are. No, I mean it's 2 sides of the same coin when it comes to this issue. But what I find very interesting is that some pretty dominant black celebrities have come out in support of Donald Trump,
yes.
Especially as of recently. Lil Wayne, the pop icon rapper, came out just I just saw yesterday he was Instagrammed a photo with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is, and they he in particular believes that what Donald Trump is doing is reforming the system and giving opportunity for especially black and brown individuals. So that tells me where this is a subject that I'm not fully informed on, but that tells me that if you have these Ice Cube is another one who's a pretty dominant individual within the black community, and he's also meeting with the Trump administration about going forward, and it's interesting.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
interesting.
Kanye West and 50 Cent also. It's funny. There seems to be a lot of rappers who are coming out in support of Trump, which is a little ironic, I suppose.
I think it means something.
Yeah.
I mean, so I can't. You hear all the bad things about Trump, but through the media. But when you see these individuals, I mean, it's it's got to amount to something.
I think, for example, in the 50 Cent case specifically, he is really opposed to kind of Biden's tax laws. He says he doesn't want to be 20 Cent.
Yeah.
Because he's worried that Biden's going to increase taxes a lot, whereas Trump so far he has increased the national deficit in spite of him saying that he was trying to get in there and decrease it. But overall, I don't think taxes have changed that much during his administration.
Yep.
But at the same time, the reforms and Trump's attempts to appeal to the oppressed minorities is something that he was pointing out throughout the debate. He said, okay, you say I'm a racist, you say I'm tough on crime, but look at the voting districts, look at how much support I have in those areas, because I bring economic freedom to them, which helps them directly. And I think this is a very important point to make, but Trump is not a Republican politician by career. He is a businessman, and people trust him more because of that. That was one of the big things that got him the presidency at 2016, I believe. Yes, people would probably trust the Republican politician less, but because Trump is independent, as not fully independent obviously, but kind of more leaning towards a compromise, and he does things that make sense to him and he can be convinced, and I think people see that and support that because of that.
I remember in 2016 when he came in, and he was kind of an outsider of politics, and a lot of people thought we need someone who's not like an institutionalized politician, and he said he was going to go in there and he used the words drain the swamp a lot. He was going to go in there and get rid of a lot of the corruption and the bureaucracy and regulations that were kind of keeping a lot of businesses back. And I don't know if I'm really educated enough to say whether or not that's happened. From my point of view, I don't really think there's much of an impact there. But another thing he talked a lot about was illegal immigration, which is our next topic. Biden says that Trump is being way too hard on illegal immigrants and violating their rights, actually. Whereas Trump says a lot of the things that he's doing now are just things he's continued from the Obama administration. And specifically, a hot button issue between these two, although I don't think it was mentioned in the debate, has been sanctuary cities, where Joe Biden says that, it's funny, it's actually the reverse of what we were talking about earlier, but where he says that states and cities have the right to not persecute illegal immigrants and provide them with services and things like that, whereas Trump says, no, that's a federal thing, you need to be able to prosecute and deport illegal immigrants.
Right. I think Donald Trump made the comment in the debate, like, who built the cages, Joe?
Yeah.
And he was talking about, and I think that was I think that was a very important point. And it's easy in debates to say, like, to point the finger at the other and say, look at you and not look at me. But I think both sides are somewhat guilty on this one. But the big issue with Trump, especially, is separating mothers and children at the border, using that as a deterrent to keep people from make immigrants think twice, and I think that's a huge issue, and that's a stain on Trump's card for sure.
Definitely.
The problem, the point of the "Who Built the Cages" Joe quote or line, which was very comedic, is that these cages and these regulations were put in place during the presidency of Barack Obama, when Joe Biden was at a very powerful position, and he did nothing to stop those record deportations, the catch and release system that Trump, by the way, got rid of.
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely. I would say that one of Trump's biggest things of Biden, where he says, why are you doing it now? You're in politics for such a long time. Why are you doing it now? I think that, I don't know, we do see two sides of the same coin here, or maybe even different coins, because we see throughout the debate, Trump has been basically deterrent-based. So we see him with crime. He says hard punishments will decrease the amount that people commit crimes. If we have very strict borders and harsh punishments for people who get caught crossing the border or even trying to immigrate legally, we will that will be less of an issue. Whereas Biden says, no, we need to relax a lot of these standards and treat them with a lot more dignity than they have been.
And in fact, Trump even said in the debate that they're so effective that it's only the crazy people that come back.
The lowest IQ ones.
Yeah, the one with the low IQs, correct. And I think the thing here, that the underlying tone for all these, we got immigration, crime, and so on, is that what gets Trump in so much trouble is his mouth. The things that he says, and it's more, and I think that's the biggest and that's why it's really hard to even get behind Trump, is because of what he says. It gets him in trouble so much, and if he just kept his mouth closed and was presidential, who knows what could happen. And he's just always, it doesn't matter how non-racist or how supportive his policies are. His mouth isn't that. It's not supportive, and the things he says are racist. So that's a really, he calls immigrants rapists and all those things that are coming across the border. They're rapists, they're criminals, they're killers, all that stuff. I mean, come on, are you serious? Like that's awful. So
Speaking of racism, this is another kind of very hot button issue that they spoke about, and again, Trump said some things that got him in trouble. Basically, Biden's position on this is that, yes, America and the police are institutionally racist, and Trump has done the opposite of calming these fires. He's actually started more fires, and he's really made the situation worse, whereas Trump says racism is not a big issue. He said he's the least racist person in the room, and he's possibly done more for the black community than any other president, with maybe the exception of Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
Right, so what do you two think about that?
Go ahead.
This kind of became a meme,
Yeah.
and Joe Biden capitalized on that, I think, which in the history of the presidential debates seemed to be a good point, because, for example, Ronald Reagan also cracked the joke, which, according to some sources, won him the presidency, because he made the opponent laugh as well, and it looked bad on camera. So the fact that Joe Biden called Trump Abraham Lincoln, when memes have been going around for the past few weeks about what he said in other interviews about him being the him doing the most for the black community. But on the other side, we see the black supporters, and we really see that a lot of black voters are in support of Donald Trump, and not only the celebrities and the rappers, but everyday men, average Joes.
Yeah, and I think this is another example of Donald Trump's mouth getting him in trouble.
Yeah.
You know, we saw in Charlottesville where we had, if you don't know the context of that, it was this neo-Nazi white supremacist group was marching in Charlottesville, West Virginia. And he didn't, and there was conflict between that group and then a leftist group or anti-racist group. And it became very violent. And instead of just downplaying the Nazi group, he said that there were both sides wrong.
Yeah.
And this is where his mouth gets him in trouble. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. It doesn't matter what his policy is. The things that he says is very, it's very inflammatory. It's very, controversial.
Yeah.
And it's also very, it doesn't unite the country. It divides it.
Yeah. Just some quick context to what I was saying earlier. The Reagan thing was a lot of people thought that Reagan was too old to be president, and the joke that he made was he said, I know a lot of people think that age is a big issue in this election, but I'm not going to make it. I know my opponent's very young and he doesn't have experience, but I still think you should give him a chance, basically. Just kind of turn the issue around. And speaking of turning issues around, I think that I wonder actually whether or not this is all kind of thought out on Trump's part, because we see he restrained himself significantly more than he did in the first debate, whether that was because of the mute button threat or because he saw that approach wasn't working for him. I wonder, because you hear it all the time. I don't think you can turn on the news station at any point in the U.S. and not have it be something about Trump. So
Right.
I think that because he says so many things, it's actually part of his strategy almost, because I think, this is obviously a bit of a reach, but I think it's trying to frame like all publicity is good publicity. He was a celebrity for a while. I mean, you even look back to the 90s, a lot of people spoke about him. He was in Home Alone. So
Yes, he was.
he's used to being in the public eye. And I think even now, certainly, I think his PR team maybe advises him to go off the rails every once in a while so that, he can get name recognition and things like that. And I don't think it's been helping him so far, which I think is why he toned it down a lot.
Well, I also think that, Biden's no angel.
Oh, no.
Biden made a very racist comment a few months ago, which says if you don't vote for Biden, you're not black. And Biden, it's and that's something very, and this is something that the media and all that they give Biden a pass and they don't give Trump a pass. Trump says something and they're all over him, but Biden has all these gaffes. He has all these things that he says that are mistakes, and they're like, haha, it's just got Biden doing his thing, and it's a double standard, but also wonder how much of that, because Trump says so many inflammatory things, that it's hard to give him a pass. No, I don't know.
Certainly. So it's.
I think a good point that you made is that it's usually the campaigns behind the candidates that make the decisions. So it might not be Trump who wanted to be more civilized or Biden who wanted to be more civilized this time, but the campaigns, the people behind the scenes that make the decisions and set the agenda and train them, like rehearse them to make sure that their monologues are on point. And I think especially with Joe Biden, he had a lot of very passionate monologues about, for example, the empty chairs in the dinner table regarding the COVID-19. I think those were very emotionally fueled.
Definitely. I think you're talking about kind of the rehearsals for the election too. And I've got to think, I wonder, it must be really, really awkward, to have them both there and kind of run through these debates before.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Could you imagine?
Yeah. But I don't know. On this one, I do think that Biden wins because he did have a passionate monologue, I think, about, and we are going to talk about this a little bit later too, and kind of the highlights of the debate section. But I certainly think that it was a big point for Biden when he did start talking about, it's a battle for the character of the country. And even if you disagree with his policies, you can at least respect that he is a lot more respectable than a lot of people see Donald Trump as someone who acts presidential and was in fact part of the presidency for 8 years.
Right. Yep. And I think that that's what the American people. This election. I really do believe this election is a referendum on Trump. The meaning that it's more about instead of people who like Biden, it's people who don't want Trump in office. And and that's that's an interesting. It's not a good place to be in an election, to be honest. So this is a very interesting election, certainly, and and I think too when it comes to racism and let's talk a little bit about the debate and so on, but just Trump's stance on like the Black Lives Matter movement and how it's just never really acknowledged it, it's never really given it any type of formal recognition, and I think that that's something that it doesn't matter if this is if the Trump camp or his supporters think that it's a real issue, but to the people what does matter is the people who are black or brown see this as an issue and it's real in their life, and just you don't have to get behind it 100%, but just acknowledge it. And he has yet to acknowledge it. And I think if he did that, it would make such an impact, or at least more of an impact than what he's doing. And that's that's something that is really big. Just acknowledging the issue, and it's not happening. And that's something that is certainly in Biden's favor. And,
Yeah, they're both actually very careful in what words they use too. I mean, you notice every time it's brought up, Trump refers to them, for example, as riots. Biden always refers to them as protests.
Correct.
And a lot of things like that where, they're careful in the way they refer to it because they're trying to paint two very different pictures of the same thing that's going on.
Yep.
Which is definitely very interesting in, how words can definitely change the framing of how you see something.
Speaking of words, I think when we talk about Trump's speech and charisma and the words he uses, he often mentions states by name, especially swing states or states that are related to the issue. For example, with the fossil fuel industry, he explicitly said Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, and Texas, and I believe maybe another one. I'm not sure, but this is an important tactic that he has used even in 2016 in the presidential debates, which is also interesting in terms of language and what kind of words we use and how it influences the outcome of the elections. But I think we have talked enough about the issue of racism, even though it is a very heated topic and it has very much of an actuality right now. But let's talk a bit about the foreign policy of the United States. Biden would like to rejoin the Paris Accord and quote-unquote rebuild alliances. And Trump is very proud that he made a peace treaty with North Korea because he said that even Obama agreed that North Korea was the biggest threat to the country in 2016, and he was quite early to acknowledge that problem and to essentially solve it debatably. But he generally put America first, put the national interest first, and he would contribute less to foreign ideals like NATO and has quit several ideals.
Definitely. So I think it's interesting because these two issues are tied together, and a big criticism of the America First things that Trump says that America First really means America alone, because you see a lot of times he is not very diplomatic with his relations with other countries. And some people see that as a good thing. I mean, America was a lot more isolationist for a long time in its history. And it seems like Trump is really heading back in that direction to where the U.S. is going to basically, bring the troops home, things like that, and be more of continental, or at least have a lot more influence within our borders and stop being the global policeman, which a lot of people criticized the U.S. for a long time. Whereas Biden says we need to be a part of the international community a lot more, and we need to lead it. We need to rejoin the Paris Accord. We need to rebuild alliances that have been damaged in this administration. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that this is, this is certainly an issue of my specialization as a teacher, and I think that this is my biggest criticism of Trump, is this very American first policy of withdrawing from the world, and we are more interconnected now than ever before, and America has served as a global superpower, and while some countries may be happy that the U.S. is withdrawing, but what people fail to understand is that in terms of, yes, we've had small domestic conflicts around the world, but in terms of international conflict, the world has been relatively peaceful and stable, and that's thanks to American power. And it's thanks to not just American power, but thanks to the institutions that the America has helped establish and help hold up. And the fact that you're withdrawing from these is very problematic, very scary, and it shows to me a lack of understanding. It absolutely does. And we'll take the Paris Peace Accord aside, but look at how Trump treats the UN. Look at how Trump treats different organizations. He says that he signed a treaty with North Korea. North Korea has just unveiled its largest nuclear ballistic missile just a few weeks ago. I think he's delusional in that regard. And also, I'm being opinionated here, but also his treatment of Putin and Russia, and also his treatment of NATO. And yes, NATO countries need to pay their bill, but at the same time, we can't forsake NATO. It's just, I think Biden said in the debate that you are poking all of our allies in the eye.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. And while I agree that we should bring troops home, but you just can't do it super fast.
Yeah.
There's one thing that power loves is vacuums. Power's like water; it will find holes to fill. And when U.S. power leaves, that there's going to be another hole to fill. And this is where we see a growing insurgency of Russian influence, and Chinese influence as the U.S. withdraws from the world. Yeah. And that's certainly debatable. And there have been plenty of people who have a different opinion than me, and I'll respect that. But from my understanding, this not a good foreign policy.
No, I know what you mean, and I think it's also important that we kind of think about Trump and the fact that it's strange almost because he does have very close relations with certain countries. He's actually received a lot of criticism for his relations with Israel and Russia in specific. But no, I agree. It's funny because there are two sides of the same coin again. Because when we first went into the Middle East, I think it was mostly Democrats who were saying, no, we can't go in there, bring the troops home. It was Republicans saying we need to go in there and stabilize the region. And now, maybe it's because the world has changed and the situation there has certainly changed a lot. Now it's kind of flipped where Republicans are saying we need to take the troops home, and Democrats are saying no, we need to keep troops there to stabilize the region again.
Yep.
But at the same time, really this issue on war and foreign policy, of interventionalism essentially, is an interesting one because Biden is very much pro-war because that's the kind of the agenda of the Democratic Party in general, and he delegates that. While Trump, in the beginning of his first campaign, was very much a pacifist in that sense. He said that, I'm going to bring the whole troops home, I'm going to negotiate like a businessman with these foreign countries. But what he did instead was that he increased the funding for the military. He has stuck with traditional traditional way of the foreign policy, and he has basically maintained the status quo, if not worsened it, which is also interesting, especially with the happenings of early 2020 with Iran. But I think an interesting aspect of it is that I think Trump realized that the military has a lot of patriotic people who are on his side and who tend to be more nationalist, and he kind of wants to win them over with these policies. Yeah,
he's actually gotten into a bit of trouble with that recently. Throughout his administration, there's been a few times where he's gotten into hot water because of his remarks about the military. John McCain, for example, is someone who's very much respected, I think, in the general American eye. He was a soldier in Vietnam, I believe, and he was a prisoner of war for a while, and he came back and became a congressman. And a lot of people really respected him. And another thing, I just looked up to make sure it's accurate, but it's interesting because I mentioned Israel earlier. It's actually very big news, and I would say mostly positive news, although I'm not very educated on the issue. Trump was actually nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize because of his normalization between Israel and Sudan, which was, I certainly think it was very important, and maybe one of the highlights and the things that, was a positive impact.
Well, yeah,
that it did.
I don't know about Sudan, but it was I do know it was also Qatar and
Yes.
UAE.
Mhm.
And so it's definitely, and those are, and I'm glad you brought that up
Yeah.
because those are definitely things that we can give Trump credit for, and they are certainly good things. I'm not, it is good. So there's two sides to every coin. And talking about it's the Republicans who are much more hawkish for war. And they're the ones, under Bush invaded Iraq and so on. But, the idea that you've completely destabilized everything and then you can't withdraw from that.
Can't
and this is where we see the rise of terrorist organizations and so on. And so, it's an interesting topic for sure.
Definitely. So now we'll talk a little bit about the highlights, and we do have a few listed here, but if either of you have anything you'd like to add or things that you thought were very interesting, please feel free to talk about them. So one of the things that Biden really did a good job on, I think, was he had this little monologue where he said, and I mentioned this earlier, kind of, it's a battle for the character of the country. A lot of people, I think, like you said, it's a referendum on Trump. I feel like the difference between Trump and Biden this election is people tend to vote for Trump and people tend to vote against Trump. There are a lot of people who are not big fans of Biden, but they just really, really do not want another 4 years of a Trump administration. So it definitely seems like it's a very contentious election. I think it is predicted to be quite close, actually, as well. But it is kind of an issue, too, where people aren't voting for the candidate that they like and respect, but they're voting against the candidate that they really don't want to see in a position of power. And I think Biden really capitalized on that. And he said, look, even if you don't like me or some of my policies, I will at least treat the Oval Office with respect, and I will do my best, and I will, treat it with dignity, basically.
Yep. And I thought that was really good, and I thought both were much more civil in this election, so I think that's certainly a highlight. This debate. The first one was just awful.
Rough, yeah.
And it was very discouraging and embarrassing as an American that the world's strongest democracy, is on display like this. But I thought it was much more civil, and I did think that Biden's comment about that was very good. I thought Trump was much more presidential, so that's a win in everybody's book. It was to me just the rhetoric and how they spoke and how they behaved and treated one another was the highlight for me. Because they were able to actually be somewhat presidential, which is something that is a rarity in 2020.
Yeah, definitely. I think I forget her name right now, but I think the moderator did such a good job. I think Chris Wallace, who was the moderator of the first debate,
he lost all control.
Yeah, he lost a lot of control, and he was basically a debater by the end of it himself.
Yep.
But I have a lot of respect for the moderator of this debate. I don't even think she had to actually utilize the mute button, but she really controlled the debate and directed it towards a positive direction.
Her name is Kristen Welker, and I think we both agree that she did a really, really great job in actually asking tough questions and moderating the debate well.
Certainly. So then I think a point that Trump made that was very interesting is when he said, "Who built the cages, Joe?" In response to kind of talking about this immigration issue, where he says that he gets a lot of heat for it, but really a lot of the things that he's been doing are just continuations of the Obama administration.
That is a memorable line for sure.
Yeah, certainly. I think it was very memorable. And a lot of people kind of went around it and said, oh, yeah, see, it's not Trump's fault. It's been going on for a while, which I don't think is necessarily true, because I think that he has definitely added things to the immigration system.
Yep.
But I think it was definitely a win for him. It's a memorable one-liner as well.
Yes, this debate certainly had memorable lines, memorable discussions, but the level of civilization that these two produced is certainly memorable as well. And this was the final debate.
Yep.
So the elections are coming up very, very shortly. We can't wait for the results. Mr. Earwood, I think you actually going to take the day of the election off to wait for the results.
No, I won't take the day off, but we're going to watch it in my classes. So
I see.
We won't be learning anything new that day.
Another thing I just want to say, so the elections are November 3rd, if you're unaware, and something that's very interesting too is the fact that the president actually doesn't change office until January. So regardless of the elections, I think it's January 20th.
Yep.
And because of the mail ballots, the results will take
it's
longer.
It's likely to be longer this election. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if there are multiple recounts even, because Trump has been against mail-in ballots for a while and Biden has been for them. And I think that if it is a close election, which it is almost guaranteed to be. I think that there's going to be a lot of debate. I'm speaking of debates about who won it and the recounts and all that. And was it 2000 when it was Bush versus Gore? So people talk a lot about the Trump's most recent nomination of the Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, which he kind of rushed through. And basically, I think sometimes it is up to the Supreme Court, as it was in 2000, to essentially decide the winner of the election when it is highly contested like this and it's unclear who really came out ahead.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court decided the election between Gore and Bush in 2000, and they actually went back and did a recount of the ballots in Florida, and it was actually Al Gore who won. But the Supreme Court had already decided, and so that was a very interesting take.
Interesting how the branches of power work in the U.S. and how checks and balances are actually implemented and people know about them. For the rest of the world, this is really something special, I think. So as debates, I think this is a good note to close our episode on. So the debates are generally a wonderful thing. This debate especially was a pleasant surprise to all of us, and we were very, very happy to have you on today.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you. I think you made a lot of very good points. Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, I'm sorry I can't be more of a help.
All good. I think
you were.
I mean, I haven't lived in the U.S. in a very long time, and my specialization is international relations and global politics. So domestic politics are...
So I think you made a lot of good points, especially in the foreign policy section. So thank you for that.
Cool.
Yes, thank you all for listening. And remember to stay cool, break the ISAK.